This is episode 58 of the Ownstream Podcast featuring Rodolfo Carrillo. Welcome to the Ownstream Podcast. Thanks for joining us. I am Stephen Shelley.
And I'm Teresa Scoba.
And I guess this interview with Rodolfo Carrillo wraps up our kind of Costa Rica travel tour guest feature. We've been traveling in Costa Rica for a couple of months. Actually, today we're back in Southern California. But along our road, on our beautiful journey, we've been talking to various people in Costa Rica doing very, very interesting things. And Rodolfo's the perfect sort of cap to that little series that we hope you've enjoyed that. We were introduced to Rodolfo through past podcast guests, Theo and Kimberly Hansen, and we reached out to them just for ideas on people we could perhaps talk to, because Theo and Kimberly have a nice relationship to the country of Costa Rica and many, many people living there. And so they immediately, both of them, were very excited to introduce us to Rodolfo. And I'm not sure how to kind of collapse his work into an idea or into some kind of brief phrase, because he's doing quite a number of things. But I guess the general work he's doing is healing work. And as we get into this fascinating conversation with him, we uncover a young man who grew up in Costa Rica with a fascinating mother who sounds really original and really amazing, quite ahead of her time, and someone who was nourished in a way by her that's very unique, and then has now kind of summoned forth all these fascinating gifts, many of them sort of quote unquote invisible, that lead him. And his healing work is fascinating. I'll let Teresa kind of talk about that. But anyway, this is a Costa Rican man who lives in San Jose, and whose life and world are changing and shaping itself more and more around what his real gifts are, which relate to healing and bridging the old kind of society that we agree is ending or folding up shop, so to speak, and the new one which is emerging, which is one that's more harmonized and unified and holistic.
Yeah, it's what's interesting is we wanted to talk to Rodolfo, and we do, about sort of what the mainstream path in Costa Rica is, because in general our podcasts have focused on sort of the more Western mainstream path, right? And then what's inspired within you that may or may not follow that path, and how do you follow your own path? And what's interesting is that Rodolfo's story about kind of the expectations and generally accepted behavior and path that was around him is not that different, I think, from the Western path in terms of the kind of pressures around college and the career and all of that. It's quite similar, and add to that, in general around him, the general Costa Rican Catholicism and structure, but not that different, and at least his experience of it. And but this is a beautiful story of what arises within and how that informs what is without. And it's because he, on the outside, has been living a fairly mainstream acceptable life in business, one that also excites him. But he's now what's been happening on the inside since he was 7 years old with his remarkable mother, cultivating his meditation practice and actually beginning to experience sort of what healing and energy work could be, even from that early age, then manifesting and deepening as he reapproached meditation and yoga later in his life. And now he's working to kind of bridge these two worlds. And I think that is what is going to be needed as we move toward a new earth, and as we move toward the creation of a society that comes from the inside rather than, dependent on the outside. So it's really like such an important conversation. Rodolfo is just wonderful to speak with and to be around, and we're really excited to present this interview.
Yeah, he through the course of this conversation, you'll hear about his specific healing modality, or what has created itself through him. he's an experienced, he's studied Reiki, he's studied reconnective healing. We talk a little bit about that. We spoke with Eric Pearl earlier on the podcast, who is the sort of the taproot for that interesting development within the healing world. But really, he's kind of made his own approach, and so we talk a lot about that. And the theme that emerges is how fast it can be to heal. It doesn't need to take decades. It doesn't need to take months even. It can take a short amount of time. And that's a really, really cool thing that more and more people are discovering. So that, along with his kind of intuitive, he's just somebody who's followed his intuition. And this fascinating, very, very unique path has formed. And I think for people who feel that there's another side to them, a secret side maybe, an invisible side that is longing and yearning to be expressed, Rodolfo will really, really inspire you, as he did us. So we'll be back afterwards to wrap up, but we're honored to present this conversation with Rodolfo Carrillo.
Okay, well, Rodolfo, welcome to the Ownstream Podcast. We are so excited to be talking to you today. And we got led to you through our friends Theo and Kimberly Hansen, who are on the podcast, and we had reached out to them because we know that they live part-time in Costa Rica and have done much of the healing work that they're building there. And we asked them about local healers that they would recommend we speak with, and immediately they both came to you and with such excitement and joy and talked about the profound impact and presence you've had in their life, and definitely wanted us to meet. And I know our paths missed in person, but we look forward to that when we go back in the fall. But we're so excited to talk to you, and so welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, Theo and Kim are amazing people and lovely friends, and I'm glad they introduced me to you. So thank you.
We are grateful. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about your childhood, so we can get to know a little bit about where you grew up. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your family life was like, and any expectations sort of on you as a child. What was it like as a child for you?
Well, I grew up in Costa Rica, right downtown in San Jose, and I have one full sister from my mom and dad, but my parents got divorced when I was 3. So I grew up with my mom and my sister, and it was a pretty regular life. Costa Rica at that time was a very Catholic country, a lot of strict rules. Since my mom was divorced, she had to deal with a lot of rejection from society because of that, because there was still a lot of expectations or demands, like social demands on how to live life and all that. But what was very interesting is, like, since my mom was a teen, she had been drawn to study and read about Oriental philosophy and meditation, and a lot of authors about how else can life be, or what is there more than life, right? And since I was a kid, my mom sort of started telling me about this, and that was throughout my childhood and my teens. She would read a book and just tell me about it, and like give me the summaries, which was very interesting. And when I was 7, I came home from school one day, and my foot was hurting, and it started hurting more and more as the afternoon went by. And I was going to sleep. I just couldn't sleep. It was hurting too much, and my mom told me, "Well, we're gonna do a relaxation." And she laid me down and she started guiding me through this relaxation process, and till I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, my foot was really swollen. I couldn't stand or put any weight on it, and I was a kid. I was 7 years old, so I was crying. So she finally took me to the doctor. They got some X-rays on it, and I had a broken toe. And the doctor asked, "Well, when did this happen?" And my mom's like, "Well, he's been complaining about the pain since he came home from school yesterday." And the doctor's like, "That's impossible, because this hurts a lot." and it's impossible for this kid to spend the night with this pain. And she's like, well, I don't know how he did it. But basically that was the start of my meditation process. After that, my mom understood the power of meditation on me, because she'd been meditating for a bunch of years. And she started guiding me through meditation since I was 7. So I've been in this meditation and personal development path or spiritual path since I was a little kid, since me without knowing that this was a special path, or such a special path, because my mom also told me that it was prohibited for me to talk to anyone about this. So, and this was because society here in Costa Rica was so close that she was afraid that people would start telling or saying that she was misguiding me, or guiding me through a wrong path. So even my very best friends didn't know that I meditated till I was like 17 or 18, when I started talking to a friend who just, he started reading about meditation. He's like, oh, I started reading about this meditation thing. It just seems so interesting. You should read about this. I'm like, well, I've been doing it for about 10 years now. It's like, no way. How did you get into it? It's like, my mom does it. It's like, I want to talk to your mom. And so my mom actually started guiding us through meditations, giving us meditations, and we had this amazing conversations when we were 17 with her, just learning from her. So it was fun, and that was my secret life till just a few years ago, about 10 years ago.
Do you remember any of the books that she was reading, summarizing for you when you were a kid? What were some of the sources she was digging into?
Oh, I can name a couple, but I know there are many more. I know she read Connie Mendes, which is like 4-in-1 meditations or metaphysical, something like that. I know she also read Lobsang Rampa, and The Third Eye, and she also read the book of Urantia. I'm not sure how you pronounce that in English.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I know she read a lot more books, but I really didn't care about the names, and that's I was a kid, so she would tell me about this other worlds and how to develop the third eye, how to meditate, and I would just put it into practice. I have a very funny story about that. Well, and I don't know if it's funny, but it's an interesting thing, because at one time she, when I was not 7, but more in my early teens, I wanted to do meditation on my own. And I asked her, well, what is it that you do? And she says, well, you got to put you got to take your mind to a blank state. And I'm like, okay, so how do I do that? So I went and sat there in my room, and I'm like, okay, so I got to put my mind in blank, and I started trying to do it, and I'm like, well, but I'm thinking about not thinking, so I'm thinking, so I can't do this. So as a kid, I decided that I was just going to focus on a white wall. And that was my path to taking my mind into a blank state. So I started focusing on a white wall, and that helped me a lot. After a while, I understood that bringing my mind, and after a while, I mean years later, I understood that bringing my mind to a blank state or to a calm state is achieved through focusing on one single thing and then releasing that. But as a kid, it was just so funny, because I just started visualizing a white wall.
Interesting.
That's how I started into it on my own.
Well, so around the age of 17, 18, did you go through like a Catholic school there? Or were you part of a public school process growing up and through high school?
I was in a private school. It wasn't related into with any religion, but I did do my first communion, and my mom was very against. If she listens to this, she'd probably be embarrassed, but she was very against the Catholic institution because of all the rejection that she went through. But she said, well, it's my obligation to introduce you into the Catholic society, because it's got to be your decision what path you got to take. So so I did my first communion, and then when I was 15, I was supposed to do my confirmation. She's like, well, you can do it if you want to, but it's your choice. I'm not going to force you. And you got to understand that in this country, if you want to get married through the church, you're going to have to do your confirmation at some point. And so at that point, I decided I wasn't going to do it. But yeah, it was interesting because I had to go through the Catholic, the preparation for the first communion and go to church and confess. And I had a lot of trouble with it because I'm like, why do I have to tell my sins to the person over there? And my mom's answers weren't very supporting. She's like, well, I don't know, but that's the way you got to do it. Like, that's the way it works there. So you got to do it if you want to get to the first communion. I'm like, oh, okay. Because in my house and in that very private area with my mom, it's like our communion was direct with God and not through anyone. So yeah, that was a challenge, but I think my mom did a good job of allowing us to have like two different spaces, like the outside world and the behavior that you need to have in order to fit into society, and then this personal world where your personal development and your spirituality can flourish.
Interesting. So your mother sounds like a very unique person, particularly at that time. I don't know what decade we're talking here, but it's probably a similar decade to when I was your age, and I'm curious as to how different she was to, say, other moms. I mean, the mere notion that she encouraged you to have a personal relationship with God, to me, is like that's extraordinary. Because that just is not. It's rare.
It's rare.
Very, very rare. So in an effort to maybe this is a good chance for us to explore kind of what the typical, if there is one even, but a typical path. For us, we often talk on the show about the mainstream path, and I'm wondering from your perspective as a young boy, maybe at the age of 10 or 13, whatever kind of feels right to you, when did you become aware of, wow, most kids go and do this. They go off to college or they go off and get a job, and then they follow that for X number of years. When did you begin to become aware of, oh, there's a way that, quote unquote, we do things here, and maybe paint that picture, what that looks like for, say, a boy growing up in San Jose at a kind of a 10 to 13-year-old age. What is that portrait?
Yeah, well, I think there was never another option that was not going through college and not going into some sort of business and like professional career, right? It was like set. That is what you got to do, and then getting married was also part of like society's ideas. Although my mom was always very open, she didn't say much when I was that young. But then later on in life, she's like, "Well, you enjoy your life, and if you want to get married, that's fine. But don't rush into it, and just have fun." And she was a hippie, and I think in a certain sense she still is, right? But she, so we're talking about when I was a kid, it's the late 70s, early 80s, and so when I went off to college, I decided I want to start a business, and I wanted to go into corporate world and all that. And spiritual life was just something that was very apart and was just my own, in my own time, in my closet, like we were talking before, right? So I was a closet meditator, and I led my spiritual life in this very private and secret way. But on the outside, I had to like fulfill like society's mandate, which was becoming a professional, having a career, making money. My dad wanted me to go into numbers and becoming this this auditor and I don't know, just making a lot of money. But my mom was very flexible, but I still ended up in business and with a college degree and a master's degree and all that, just fulfilling the mandate.
And so you kept these parts of your life separate for a long time. So maybe you can, like, as you were building this business, like, tell us a little bit about what your career was, and also maybe like what was your spiritual practice at that time, and what was your understanding of your relationship to God as you were going through that on the external.
Well, I started business, and then when I finished my degree, I went into a multinational company and started working with them. And it's interesting because at this moment, I remember that when I went into the multinational company, I forgot about my meditation, and I sort of went to corporate world and stress and running and rushing and all that. And then after a few months, my back was hurting because of the stress, and I started buying these DVDs about yoga and meditation. and my friends in the company, they were like, "Why are you buying that stuff?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. It just seems interesting." And I started like trying out yoga, and this is like the late 90s. And in Costa Rica, yoga wasn't a thing then. It was just starting. And I started doing that, and then I sort of started remembering my practice, my childhood and my teen years as I meditated. But then I did my master's degree in family business and entrepreneurship, and I came back to Costa Rica. I did that in Spain. I came back to Costa Rica and started my own consulting practice, which I've been doing for the past 12 years. But it wasn't until I was a few years into family business that I realized that I wanted to combine my spiritual life and my personal and my business life. And that came through as purpose. And that is something that is really important for me right now, because I realized when I was 2 years into the family business consulting practice that what I really wanted to do was contribute to the world's well-being. And that's what I decided right there and then. And that's the moment that my paths started crossing, my spiritual path and my business path started crossing, because I was working with families and I was seeing I was seeing the impact of the work that I was doing with them, and I was seeing how they were doing better and the families were coming back together. And I also started a foundation which is called Positive World. So I started sharing my personal development path with at-risk communities. And at that moment, I decided that I wanted everything that I did had to contribute to the world's well-being. And I didn't know it at that moment that my path was starting to cross. But now that I look in retrospect, I can see that was the moment where it started crossing. And more as I went deeper into it, it sort of started like integrating more and more. And it's been a few years, and it's still integrating. I'm still not fully integrated, because even though I'm working on conscious business development and conscious leadership, which is basically taking meditation and purpose-driven business and developing purpose-driven businesses and bringing work on the ego to leadership and all that. There's still a part of me, which is the healing part, the magical and quote unquote part that is still not fully out. Right, which is my healing practice, that I'm still, even though I'm not hiding it anymore, because I used to hide it. It's not. I'm not promoting it still or yet. Right. I think I'm almost ready to do it.
Early in your business career, were you wholehearted when you were at this? In your jobs, or was there part of you that just sort of felt, this doesn't feel right, I don't quite understand why I'm doing this? Was there Was there any sort of part of you that was awake to another possibility through that time frame, or were you kind of there and in full surrender of what that was about?
Well, I don't think it was a conscious decision, but everything I've done in my life, every job that I've had, I've always been able to see the benefit of it. Like, I've never done work for money, right? The first work that I did was employee services. The first corporate job that I had, because I had a couple jobs before that, but the first corporate job that I had was employee services, and it was basically taking care of companies' employees, making sure their benefits were going well, helping them solve any situations that they had around their health, their insurance, and stuff like that. So I felt like I was contributing to their well-being. Then I had another job, which was before I went to do my master's degree, which was actually over the phone interpretation. And because of my level of English, I got to do all calls, or all kinds of calls. And most of the ones that I did were 911 interpretations. And this was 911 operator will call us and they will tell us, I have a person on the phone who doesn't speak English. I don't speak Spanish, obviously. So would you please help me? And I got to interpret a lot of amazing stuff, and very hard stuff. I got to interpret. There was a guy who called, his mom was not breathing, and I got to interpret instructions for him to give him mouth-to-mouth and mouth-to-mouth breathing and resuscitation till the paramedics got there, or the ambulance got there. So I think even though they were not conscious decisions, and my first conscious decision on having any kind of work or bring benefit to the world wasn't until about 10 years ago. I've always had business or jobs that have led me in that way. So it was, I think it's just, I would attribute that to my mom's teachings and just following my heart and being able to choose, even though it was unconscious, things that would actually make me feel better.
That's beautiful. I'm curious, just as a quick follow-up, you said you never took a job for money, and I'm wondering if there was if maybe your mom taught you or you just intuitively knew something about money, something about that phenomena, particularly when it comes to trading time for money and working in big businesses, that there was something not quite resonant with you about that something didn't quite harmonize with you about that. What was it about money itself that didn't click in that way?
I think I can't pinpoint the moment I was taught that, but I do remember that at some point I had the conversations with my mom when I was a teen about happiness not being about having, but about being, and what that being meant. And I know that we had the conversations. I can't remember when. And I know that at the moment when I was about to choose my career, I had this amazing privilege that when I was faced with the decision of what I wanted to study, my admission tests to the university were so good that I could basically choose whatever I wanted. And it was hard because now I had to decide what did I want, right? It would have been probably easier if it's like, all your admission tests allowed you to study is this, right? That would have been an easy choice. But then I was faced with the decision that I could do anything I wanted, and I had to think about it. And I had conversations with my mom and my uncle because I was torn between law, medicine, and business. And I had the conversation with my uncle, who was a doctor, and he talked about the practice and all that. And I could see him, like, it's a very sacrificing job, because I could see him walk out of family meeting or family reunions because he had to go see a patient. And I talked to my aunt, who was a lawyer, and I could see her work, and meant reading a lot, which I'm not passionate about. So that wasn't that attractive to me. And then I decided to go into business just because I could do anything I wanted with business. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that through business I could facilitate anything, and that I was not looking for money, but I was looking for something that would fulfill me, and that was a result of a conversation I had with my mom at some point.
So all of your life you were pursuing work that would fulfill you or would bring you a sense of being, and but there was a shift that you had in your career where I think you said something earlier, like your two lives came together over the sense of purpose, life purpose. So, and that you knew you wanted to contribute to the well-being of the world. Maybe you can, since it sounds like you were doing a little bit of that in many of the jobs you had, what changed there? Like what sense of purpose came through you? We talk a lot about your calling arising or knowing your calling in the world on this show. Like, tell us a little bit more about what specific purpose came to you and how you moved forward to manifest that.
Yeah, actually, the moment when I made the decision, it was a very interesting moment because I was financially struggling a lot, and at that moment, I was being offered some jobs in a corporate world, and I had to make a decision. And when I went to corporate world and had my financial situation solved, and financial stability and job stability, sort of, right. Or stay and work it out. And I was struggling with, I was frustrated, I was afraid. And at that moment, I just decided that that my commitment to the universe was that anything I would do would contribute. And if I did that I would, and I had to trust that if I did that the money would come. And it really didn't matter what I did, but that I'd have to contribute. And that sort of opened up the blockage I had around money, and allowed me to flow to move more deeply into the family business consulting part, and the other things that I've done. I think the most impactful situation that was happening around that was dealing with clients and families, with a few I had that, and seeing them grow and feel better, and their development as I did the work with them. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'll follow up with that. So what kind of transformation were you seeing happening in the families? Like what gift were you giving them, or what kind of change were you seeing happening that was so meaningful to you, that was showing you the way forward?
Well, the interesting thing is that I got into family business consulting because I'm fourth generation in a family business that died when it was going from the second generation to the third. Mm-hmm. And as the family business died or collapsed, the family also collapsed. So the family got broken apart. And that was when I was like about 16 or 17 years old. And then I did my master's degree about 10 years later, not knowing exactly what I was going to do with the family, with the master's degree. But when I came back and I started working with them, I started seeing that families could avoid going through what my family had gone through. Then it started becoming very rewarding, and very healing also, right? It was about healing in other families what I couldn't do in my own family. Mm-hmm. So as I saw them having a structure, being able to come to decisions together, being able to anticipate conflict and have situations or have options on how to resolve those conflicts when they were going to show up, then in seeing them just more united and coming together around business instead of having the business tear them apart, that became very, very rewarding, because I was seeing what I wished my family had gone through or had been able to do in them.
And so the theme of healing is a big one for you, and maybe we could kind of begin to explore then the more specific kind of healing work that you intuitively began to do, and the shapes and sizes that it took on, and then alongside that, I think as important to that is the coming forward of this as more front and center feature of your life. And you've talked about having a secret life, and then having but bringing this out of, say, the spiritual closet, if you will, this side of you, which I think may more and more become maybe what's leading your work, this notion of healing.
Okay, yeah. When I was doing my business work, my family business work about 12 years ago, then the whole yoga scene in Costa Rica started picking up to a point where, well, Costa Rica is now like a yoga retreat center for the world, right? So a lot of people come here to do meditation, yoga, and all that stuff. But 12 years ago, it was just starting. And I had some friends come up and say, hey, you should try that yoga stuff and meditation stuff. It's sort of like your vibe. It seems like it would fit. It's a good fit for you. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've been doing the meditation part for about 30 years, right? But so I started going into that scene and started meeting people who were meditating and who were like in the spiritual path. And it was very interesting. So I had a partner, a girlfriend, and we used to meditate together. And then one day she had a headache, and I just felt the need to put my hand on her forehead and start breathing in a certain way. And after a few minutes, I took my hand away. She's like, well, the headache's gone. I'm like, yeah, really? And she's like, yeah, what did you do? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. I just started breathing in this way, and this is what happened. I'm like, well, it's gone. I'm like, okay, great. Then a few days later, my mom had a headache, and I feel very comfortable with her about all this stuff. So I did the same thing. I put my hand on her forehead, started breathing in a certain way, and the headache went away. And she's like, what did you do? And I'm like, well, I'm not sure. So I started exploring that. So I studied Reiki, but I didn't feel that was the way I needed to move energy. And then, so I didn't, even though I studied levels 1 and 2, I never did fully did the Reiki thing. Then I met this guy who told me, hey, what you do sounds more like reconnective healing, so you should go and do this reconnective healing stuff. So I went to a seminar in Panama with Dr. Eric Pearl about reconnective healing, and I studied that, and it was more of the way I do the energy work, but it still wasn't the full thing. So I kept on doing my whole personal, what my intuition told me to do, and the more I got into it, the more I started to understand it, and I started recognizing that I could feel a lot of stuff that was going on in people as I was doing it, and I could read into the people's energies and get images and why there were blockages and just sensations, and I started dealing with that and working with that with people. And that's sort of the part that's not fully out there right now. I do it, and I do it quite a bit. Actually, I have a session after this conversation we're having with someone, and then I have another session on Thursday. But then I can go a month without a session, and I get 3 in a couple weeks. And my regular work is with businesses. But this other part is like very, very interesting because I've been exploring it for quite a few years now, about 8 or 9 years. And more information comes. And actually at this reconnective healing workshop or seminar, I met this guy who, we had this conversation during a coffee break, and he said, what are you doing here? I'm like a family business consultant. It's like, well, why are you here? And I'm like, well, this is my secret life. And he laughs, and I ask him, what are you doing here? He's like, well, this is my secret life also. I'm in corporate world. And I'm like, oh. So we started laughing and started talking about it. He asked me, have you ever thought about combining these two and bringing this sort of information into business world? And I'm like, yeah, I've thought about it, but I've never done anything. He's like, well, let's do something together. And he shows me a card, and he's a VP for Latin America, a multinational company for Latin America. I'm like, wow, okay, so I got my first client, and that's how I got into business, bringing this information into businesses. But right now there's still like very different, not very different. They're still separated. In a sense, it's like I go into businesses and I do my conscious business and conscious leadership, and I teach them about ego and meditation and dealing with their emotions and belief systems and all that. But then the healing part, the one-on-one part, even though sometimes at my workshops I use it like in a secret way. It's like I could read into something that's going on, and then I'll just bring it up and put it out on the table without telling them what I'm doing. But the one-on-ones is it's still very powerful, because in 5 to 10 minutes I get to tap into very deep personal stuff that the person has been holding on maybe for years, and they sort of forgotten that it's there, but it's still impacted in the present moment. So we get to work around it or work with it so they can actually heal that and move forward with it.
When something like that is healed, what from your perspective is actually occurring? And what are you facilitating?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because basically the reason I got to the way I'm working right now is because at the beginning I started doing the energy work. And the energy work was just recognizing where the energy wasn't flowing right, and I would just open up that blockage and let the energy flow. But then I got the information, or at that moment I got the information that the person will start talking and like, oh yeah, I'm going through this and this and this. I'm like, yeah, I just saw it. I wouldn't tell them that. I'm like, yeah, I already know that. But then I thought, it's like, well, they're going to go back to their regular life, and they're going to bring back the same situation back into their bodies and then in their energies. So basically the work that I do now is I don't care so much about releasing the energy blockage. It's like what I do is I want them to bring their consciousness to that energy blockage and recognize why they have created it, so they can release it themselves. So they will, as you bring consciousness to why you created it, and you release it yourself, then whenever you want to go back to it, then you can stop it. And I think it's better explained with an example. Let's say as a kid, you were told that you were inadequate for something, and then you believe that, and that creates a blockage in your body, in your energetic body, in your emotional body, or your mental body, and then you become inadequate for doing that for the rest of your life. So I can release that blockage energetically, but then whenever you're faced with the same situation, let's say you're inadequate for talking in public. Whenever you're faced into that same situation, even though the energetic block was released, the emotional block was released, your thought is going to go back to your subconscious. Your subconscious thought is going to bring it back. It's like, oh, I can't do this. Right? So you create the blockage again. So basically, what I work with people is I bring the consciousness to it, so they can actually recognize that they have created that blockage when they were kids, and then the whole emotional situation just anchors it into place. And then when they're faced again with it, it's like they can rewire their thinking. And it's like, oh no, I can do this. Let me explain that in a better way. It's like when we're faced as kids with a situation, and let's say we're programmed, and we go into, let's use the same example. The kid goes up on a stage and he gets scared or she gets scared, and she fails at whatever she was supposed to do. She falls down. So she comes down and she's scared and she feels bad about herself. She feels shameful. And her mom tells her, don't cry, right? It's okay. Don't cry. You just don't have to get up on stage again, right? So that kid takes that fear, and instead of releasing it, it gets blocked. And it becomes like a cyst. Right, and that belief that I'm inadequate for public speaking or for being on a stage is now anchored by the feeling of fear and rejection, right? And even though as an adult, the adult wants to release that belief system and wants to tell themselves, I am adequate. This is easy. I can do it. I can have fun with it. The emotional situation of when they were kids has that belief system or that belief anchored into place. So in order to be able to transform that belief, you actually have to release that emotion. So you actually have to go back to that moment when it was created and release the emotion, and then the belief can be transformed. So that's what I can pinpoint when I work with someone. I can pinpoint that emotional blocks that hold belief system or beliefs into place, and then once we release that emotional block, then the beliefs can actually be easily replaced. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, completely. It's so beautifully explained, I think, so clearly explained. These types of blockages, and the example you used about inadequacy, the belief in inadequacy in childhood, I imagine being one of the most very common, right? Like these types of blockages are creating so much pain and separation among human beings on the planet. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about some of the common blockages you see, and some of the things that you think might be creating some of the suffering that's happening on the planet, because it feels like the solution to this, well, then we can get into the solution, I guess, but maybe some of the common things that you see that you've been able to help people to release.
Yeah, I think the most common things have to do with us not fulfilling our parents' wishes in a certain way, in the situations that we go through with our parents, and this is the way I see it is, our society teaches us the way a family should be, right? So mom, dad, kids, and they all have to get along together and love each other above all things, right? But none of our lives are that way, right? Or very few people have actually that sort of family, right? So when our minds are programmed into living this perfect life, but our reality is different, and we create this emotional situations like, well, my dad yells at me, my mom hit me, my dad left me, all these things, we're not allowed to emotionally process them. We don't accompany kids in their emotional process. We don't allow them to feel. It's like, yeah, your dad left. Yeah, that's fine, but you got to be all right. Right? And we don't allow them to that dichotomy or that paradox of the idea that we teach each other about how a family should be and the way that our families really are create suffering in our brain systems and in our minds. It's like we have an idea of what life should be like, and our life's not that way, and that creates a gap, and that gap creates suffering. So we're trying to bridge that gap through understanding, but that gap creates an emotion. And that emotion, if it's not processed and if the mental gap is not bridged, then we replace or we bridge. I'm going to say it in another way. As we have that gap, the only way to bridge that gap, not the only way, but the way we're bridging that gap is through pain and through understanding, which is linked into pain. And by this I mean, it's like I understand that my dad left us alone, but I understand why he did that, right? And even though I feel pain, I don't allow myself to feel pain because I understand that he left, that he had to leave. And I just let me use a better example or go further into that example. It's like if let's say my dad died and he had cancer. So I understand that I had to grow up just with my mom because my dad died. But it wasn't, even though I feel abandoned, because the kid doesn't understand. I mean, we're talking about a 5-year-old kid, a 6-year-old kid who doesn't understand that his dad got cancer and he died because people get cancer, right? He really feels abandoned. He feels vulnerable. He feels unsafe. His family is not the typical family, so he feels different from his friends. And the way to bridge that is by understanding. Right? That pain is not processed. It's not that kid's not allowed to release that pain, because we sit down with that kid and we explain to that kid what happened, and we explain to that kid that his dad got cancer, and God takes people whenever He wants, and you got to deal with that, and you got to be okay because that's just the way God wanted it. So that pain is not released. You bridge that gap by understanding that he had to leave, but that understanding is attached to that feeling of loneliness or abandonment or insecurity or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now, in order for you to be able to heal that feeling of abandonment or that feeling of insecurity, you actually have to go back to that moment and recognize that those feelings and let them out, because they're still there. And every time after or when you're older, then relationships that you build, they're built on abandonment, and they build you tend to pair yourself up with someone who will repeat the pattern,
mm-hmm.
which was abandoning you. So you can try to heal that situation. It's like, okay, this one's not going to abandon me, so I'm going to hold on to this one because I'm going to heal whatever the pain that I've had for all these years. So in order to actually heal that, it's like you got to go back to your childhood and release that emotion. And when you release that emotion, now you can change the pattern. So in order to answer your question in a shorter way, sorry I go into this so much, but it's just to me it's just amazing how our mind works and how we process all these things. So basically, every emotional situation that we have as a child, since we haven't learned how to accompany a child through that emotional process, because we try to program them, we try to get them from the emotion. Before a kid is 7 to 8 years old, everything they process through the emotional body, not through the mental body. They still don't understand the world. And we as adults, we process most of our stuff through our mental body. We understand, we think, we understand, we rationalize. And we process very little through emotions. We're not fully in contact with our emotions. That's why we don't understand why our anxiety leads us to eating, because we don't deal with anxiety. we deal with our physical sensation, which is our stomach turning over. So we feed ourselves instead of dealing with the anxiety. But then the kids, all they're doing is they're processing emotional information because they still don't understand. So since we don't allow them to fully process the emotional part because we want to teach them the mental part, we block them. We block their emotions. We teach them how to block their emotions. So they're feeling, they fall down, they start crying, and we tell them, it's okay, don't cry, it's okay. We stop their emotions, right? If someone takes something away from them and they feel whatever it is that they feel, they start complaining, and we tell them, you're not supposed to feel that way. Right? So we tell them not to feel. Those teachings on what not to feel is what creates the blockages, right? So there's very, very simple situations that don't have, or little situations don't have a lot of impact on them, but the bigger ones, abandonment or abuse or all that, they create like very deep images. So even if a kid is abused, most of them, because I've dealt with a lot of people being abused, and it's just amazing the level of abuse that's out in the world. Most of the situations have not been emotionally processed. The person has never talked to anyone. They went and talked to their mom or their dad, and they told them they weren't supposed to feel bad, or they were supposed to quiet down and not say anything, and they were not emotionally supported. So that emotion is still blocked there. That fear, that insecurity, that pain, that anger is still there. And then it attaches itself to a belief that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not supposed to be pretty, because if I'm pretty, I get raped. So that idea of being pretty or good looking or whatever cannot be changed because it's attached to fear and anger. Because we were not told how to deal with that. So the most common situations, to answer your question, are those. It's just when we're kids, the paradoxes between the idea of what a family should be and the way our families really are, and that difference, the big differences that we all experience, are, I'd say, the root of most of our situation or blockages in our lives.
And when you're helping someone, what is this process, this healing process, tend to look like? And is it the kind of thing that is handled or journeyed through? Handled is not the right word, but journeyed through, say, in a few sessions, or does it take a long time? Maybe help us understand what the journey tends to look like for someone undergoing this process with you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not very good at long processes. I get very impatient. so I tend to deal with stuff in very few sessions. I basically, a session starts out with me doing an energetic reading. And once I pinpoint a few things, then I start talking to the person and I give them the information that I received. And I ask them to help me interpret that information, because most of the time it's just images or sensations that don't make any sense to me because they're absolutely out of context. So I would get an image, let's say, of a very angry father and a child, I don't know, just curled up in a ball in a corner of a room. And that's what I would give the person. And then the person starts telling me, well, yeah, when I was a little kid, my dad used to be an alcoholic, and he used to hit me and hit my mom, and I was very scared and all that. So we start working out of that. Once we understand the situation, the energy is still there. Then what needs to be done is the release of the emotional pain. And that release of the emotional pain is fairly simple, because it tends to be there, like right there, at skin level. When the person starts talking about it, they start crying, they start feeling the pain, the anger, the fear. They start feeling everything because it's still there. So basically what I tell the person is that they need to release that. Instead of holding it back, they need to let it go, and they need to recognize that it's there. There are several ways to do it. One is right there on the one-on-one sessions, like, okay, so start talking about it and start allowing yourself to feel that, right? And release that, release by talking about it, and to recognize that those feelings that you have are real and they're valid. And I can do that in the one-on-one session. The other way is you can go home and you can write a letter. And that's usually some of the times I recommend that, because some people are not ready to open up that deep in a first session with me. So a lot of them do, but if you want, you can go home and then write a letter to whoever hurt you, right? And release that pain and say everything that you needed to say. It's like you need to bring it out. Right? And you need to allow yourself to process that pain. And the way I describe it to them is like, there's your emotional self, and then there's your mental self. And for a bunch of years, your mental self has been oppressing your emotional self. Your mental self has been telling your emotional self you're not allowed to feel. Like that pain that you feel, you got to release it. Or you're not allowed to feel it. It's like, that happened a long time ago. We're not supposed to feel that way anymore. Right? So that's your mental self crushing your emotional self. So for a moment, what you want to do is you want to allow your emotional self to express whatever it needs to express. Like, I feel hurt, I feel pain, I feel abandoned, I feel betrayed, whatever it is, and just let it out. So you're going to do that. Doing it through writing allows your mind to focus on it and not go away. So writing is very powerful for that. Mm-hmm. And while you're doing this emotional process, your mental self, what you want to do is you want to observe this process, and you want to encourage your emotional self to heal, right? Or to let go of that, and to go deep into it and validate yourself in that process. Mm-hmm. So once you do that, then now you got to make a commitment. And then the commitment is your mental self has to commit to accompany your emotional self for the rest of your life, mm-hmm. in a certain way, right? It's like, okay, so whenever we feel this way again, we're not going to suppress it. We're not going to deny it. We're going to honor it. And we're going to recognize it. We're going to say, hey, yeah, we felt this way. We don't need to feel this way anymore. But if it's still there, we're going to allow it to come out. Right? It doesn't mean that you allow your emotions to become you, and you can go out and hurt someone else. It's not about that. It's about recognizing that, hey, there's pain, and this pain is still there, and I'm going to let it out. And once you learn to do that pairing process, which is the mental self accompanying the emotional self, then you can negotiate. And negotiate means, okay, I can feel, but I'm not going to, but the emotion is not going to take over. Right? Because most of the situations, or most of the times what happens is when your mental self has been oppressing your emotional self for too long, then there are certain moments that trigger you. And when that trigger happens, your emotional self takes over. So you become the hook. Mm-hmm. Right? And you explode, and you're out of control, and your emotions are just bursting out, and you lose control. It's like, because it's been suppressed for so long that when something triggers you, then the emotional self now takes over. It's like, okay, we're not thinking anymore, we're just reacting. So what we want to do is we want to develop that relationship between the emotional and the mental self, so that they're side by side, and they allow each other to coexist, and they help each other, and they recognize each other, and they talk to each other. So that's like the after you release the emotion, you got to make that commitment to yourself. It's like, how do you want to relate to yourself? And then that's also good for you to put in writing and then make a commitment to yourself. How are you going to accompany yourself? What is it that you're going to allow yourself to do? What is it that you're not going to allow yourself to do? What is it that you want for yourself? How are you going to take care of yourself? So you write a letter. Basically, so you write a letter to yourself and make that commitment. It's like, how am I going to change myself and foresee or create a future vision of how's your life going to change and how are you going to build that?
And this process, what I'm interested in is, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and I think many people still believe this to be the case. It was fairly accepted in across our society that, if you're going to unpack the baggage of your childhood, it could take years to fully exhume the attic of all of this stuff. And what I'm interested in what you're describing and what we're seeing in other healing modalities, healers, paradigms, however you choose to think about that, is that in many cases it takes, a few hours or a couple of weeks maybe, or not nearly as long as it used to. Maybe you could speak a little briefly about kind of why, what's come forward, what do we know now, what's happening that makes it so much more accelerated to move through these blockages and release them?
I think that we now understand that our mind is fully able to reprogram itself in seconds. But we need to understand what are the situations that prevent it from fully reprogramming itself. And by this, I mean, it's like once you understand, or you're afraid of something, you're afraid of public speaking again. And it's like, well, you want to reprogram yourself and you want to tell yourself, I want to be comfortable with public speaking. And you start telling yourself that, but it doesn't happen. It's like you don't feel comfortable. You still sweat a lot. You stumble, you stutter, and it's like, well, why is this going on? It's like when you understand why it is that you can't reprogram yourself, and that's a root cause, and you can reprogram that root cause, then or you can release that root cause of the fear, then the reprogramming becomes very simple, because now there's no reason why for it to stay in place. So I think that we're understanding that, and so we are looking for the root cause. We're not looking in that root cause. We also understand that when we're kids, we are fully, I don't want to say fully, but we're pretty much blank pages. And what was programmed during our first years of our lives is pretty much what serves us for the rest of our lives, unless we do a conscious process of reprogramming it. So we want to, or basically the way I work, I don't know a lot of other people that work that way, but basically what I want to do is I want to go into those few years first and see if there's anything in those years that is actually triggering what's happening in the present. Because most of the time it's there. It's like I've had very few clients in which the situation that they're facing is fairly recent, and the childhood is let's say healed, right? Most of the situations are in our past. And I think that since we're understanding that, it's simpler for us to just go to the root cause and just work with that instead of taking years of going back and back and back and trying to understand the patterns. Like, well, look for the root cause. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And we'd love to hear a little bit more about how this comes to you. Like, what is this experience for you like? What is the process of receiving this information? Can you talk a little bit about your side of this process, I guess, a little bit? Like, what is the healing like? What does it feel like to receive this messages? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. For me, it's sort of like, I'd say when you go to a doctor and you have a pain in your stomach, then the doctor will put his hands into your stomach and just push and feel around the organs, and then they're like, oh, this doesn't feel right, and he'll identify something that's either out of place or hard or whatever it is, right? So basically, what I do is very similar to that. Like, I'll tap into someone's energy, and then I get drawn to places where the energy is not flowing right, and it feels like a cyst, like a hard ball. And once I get that, that is once I sort of, I don't want to say touch it because I don't touch it, but once I tap into that energy still got the information of what caused it. It's like, let's say you write up in a paper, I hate myself, and you crush it and you do a ball with it, and then you put it in your pocket. And you've been carrying that paper around for 30 years. I hate myself. And then in your pocket, it looks like you've got something in there. So I can see that, I can understand it. And then when I tap into it, it's like I take the paper and open it up, and it still says, I hate myself. Right? Because that's what you wrote 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, right? So whenever I tap into that energy, still got the same information that created the cyst. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. Like, if you make brownie and you put X amount of ingredients in it, and you put it away in a airtight box, and you keep it for 30 years, and 30 years afterwards you open it up and you analyze it, it's still got the same ingredients, right? It's the ingredients you used to create that brownie, and that's just the way I see energy works. It's like, when you create something with a certain energy, it'll keep that vibration or that energy for as long as you want it to. And you just got to tap into it, and then when I tap into it, I get images or feelings or words. Sometimes come up, even ages. Sometimes it's like, okay, 13. I'm like 13 and pain, and I'm like, well, what happened to you when you were 13? That created pain in you, and then the person immediately goes there and is like, oh, when I was 13, this happened to me, or 6 or 7, or so. I don't know if that explains it. It's hard to explain energy.
No, it's great.
I appreciate your trying.
Oh, it's very. I thought it was very clear. And one quick question I wanted to ask about that. We haven't talked about the physical, but in your experience, I mean, the physical ailments we're dealing with today. I know you're talking about energy, but these types of blockages create much of the physical illness that we experience today. Isn't that right?
Well, it's absurd for us to think that our mental, emotional, physical bodies are disconnected from each other.
Right.
It's like whatever we think actually creates a biological reaction, a chemical reaction in our minds and in our bodies, and then that creates a physical reaction. So if we think that we are, I don't know, that we hate ourselves, that actually that'll trigger an emotion, a physical reaction, will release a hormone that will go through our bodies, and then our bodies start reacting to it. So basically, whenever someone's got a physical ailment, there's either a real physical situation to it, which would be you're either not eating right, or not resting well, or not exercising, or there's an emotional and mental situation attached to it. So whenever someone comes to me and says, "Oh, I'm sick," I'm like, "Okay, so are you eating right? Are you exercising? Are you sleeping well?" Like, yes. Okay, so now we're going to start looking into the emotional and the mental. But if a person's not eating right, or not sleeping or resting or taking care of the body, then they got to start through doing that. But when that's done, it's really interesting because I was with Theo with Theo and Kim at their event. They did an event about healing cancer through diet, right? And there was about 40 cancer patients there. And I got to work one-on-one with probably around 20 of them. And all 20 of them, I did not know what kind of cancer they had. But all 20 of them, I did the reading, and I told them what I saw, and the cancer had sort of some sort of relation to the emotional aspect that I was seeing on them. Let's say one had breast cancer, so they had issues with their moms and being a mom or the maternity, right? And another one had, I saw a lack of will to live, and they had leukemia, which was life flow. Leukemia's got to do with the blood, and blood is life flow. So if you don't have the will to live, then it's fairly obvious that your life flow, vitality is going to go bonkers, or it's not going to work right. So it was very interesting. It was very validating for me, because it was so interesting to see that all the emotional situations that I saw had some sort of relationship to the cancer.
Mm. Yeah. One final question I had, because I know we need to wrap up before we get into our last questions we ask everyone on our podcast. Bringing your worlds together, and I know this is a work in progress for you right now, thinking about like the global challenges we're facing and a lot of the pain that we're suffering in the world. How do you see bringing this, ultimately, like, how do you envision or feel called to or dream about, if you're not ready to do it yet, bringing this work to some of these, some of the big companies that you are working with in your other life? And how do you see bridging these worlds to address some of the more global pains we're experiencing?
I think this healing work, which is sort of different from the business work that I do, but this in a certain way. But this healing work, the way I see it being bridged is, I think more and more doctors need to open up to the fact that our situations our physical ailments are much more deeper than just physical, right? And they're emotional and they're mental, and we need to explore into that. And there's actually like energetic ways in which we can tap into it to allow for more integral integral way of healing, and dealing with something just on a physical level is sometimes not enough. And I've seen doctors. I know Theo and Kim know several doctors that are open to it, and I have a friend which is a doctor which is very open to it. And the more we open up to it and start working in a more holistic way, the easier it's going to become, and the faster we're going to grow in that way. On the business level, I think knowing ourselves, knowing how we work ourselves. I always start my workshops telling people we are complex systems. We're not simple systems. We are very complex. And the more we understand about ourselves, the less complicated it becomes to work with ourselves. But we're complex, and we got to understand that something that happens on a mental level can end up being a physical ailment, and the other way around too. Like something that starts on a physical level can turn out to be a mental impairment for the rest of your life. And we just got to understand the relationships that or the system that goes on, the complex system that goes on within us. And the more we understand about ourselves, the easier it is to work with ourselves and then with others. So it's all about personal knowledge and knowing ourselves.
Great, thank you. So there's 3 questions we ask at the end of every podcast. So we'll ask those now. The first one, I know you said that reading is not your passion, I think, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. What book or books, up to 3, would you recommend that everyone should read?
That's fairly simple. It's not my passion, but I've done quite a bit of reading. I'm picking it up because I left it for a few years. But one of the books I just love is the Book of Wisdom from Osho. And it's just a book that changed my life when I first read it about 10 years ago. So that's one. I'm reading Sapiens right now, which I found amazingly interesting, about the history of Homo sapiens. That was really interesting. And I think Viktor Frankl's, what's the name of it?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes, that one. Yeah, purpose, finding purpose in everything that we do. Those are like 3 amazing books that I recommend.
Great.
And I'll throw in a 4th one just because
please.
I just love the Dalai Lama and the art of compassion. I think it's the name of it. And he's just a beautiful being, my spiritual guide. And this book of The Art of Compassion is it's a little small book, but it's about connecting with everyone and bringing compassion to life. And I just love it.
You know, I think our last guest only offered 2 books, so you've balanced that perfectly. Second question. So if you could share one thing, one maybe idea or point of view that you have, but if you could share that with someone who's very stuck deep in maybe a life that they are not excited by, or one that is maybe given to them but not the one that they've chosen. If you could give that person one thought, and what would that be? What would that be? Particularly if they're stuck, say, in pain, or feeling anger, or even some trauma, what would be the one thing that you would share with them?
I'd say that first step into healing is to allow for the pain or whatever it is to come out, and for us to acknowledge it. That's as long as we keep on repressing our pain or suffering, it's never going to come out. So it's finding a safe space to let it out and just live it out, and then you can start moving forward from it.
Great.
That's great. The third final question is, what are you most excited about in your life right now?
What am I most excited about? Wow. I think that the philosophy that I'm bringing into businesses, which is basically, like I said, we're complex systems, but the philosophy that I'm bringing into businesses will allow us to understand better how we create systems and how to change them. Mm-hmm. Basically, I have a 5-principle and 7-aspect model that we use, and that in the way we see ourselves, we see the system, and the way the system is designed, we can adjust to it on a personal level. And once we start integrating that more and more into systems, then we're gonna find that changing systems and changing the world is very much simpler than what we thought of. So I'm excited about sharing that more and more, and changing businesses from revenue-driven to purpose-driven, mm-hmm. and having people align with that in a simpler way.
That's exciting. Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool. Yeah, we talked before the show about sort of one of the themes that many people have these days is sort of having a 1 foot in 2 worlds. One in the kind of the old world that's probably ending, and a new one that's beginning. And it seems like one thing that's prevailing in your particular story along that line is is connecting things, connecting, our mind and bodies together, our emotional lives, bringing that into harmony with the body, and then kind of taking that from a kind of a micro vision and say a human being to a corporate structure or a business structure, kind of helping expand the vision of those, bringing in more than just maybe the prevailing, in probably in both cases, mental system, kind of harmonizing other systems within that. This is pretty cool. I'd be very keen to hear kind of how you approach businesses, because I think that's revolutionary, really, really important.
Yeah, I think we need a whole other podcast about it. Talk about that, because it's really interesting. I love it, and I think to what you're saying, I fairly much accepted that my role right now in this world is to bridge those gaps. Like I've been on the business side, like fully on the business side, and forgotten about my spiritual life, and then I sort of wanted to go into the other side and even thought about becoming a monk, right? And going into the spiritual side and all this mystical stuff. And then I find myself right now, like, sort of in the middle, in trying to balance them out. It's like, okay, so I'm no longer considering becoming a monk and going and living in a monk for the rest of my life. And I don't want to go forget about my spiritual side and just go back into money making life. So I think that right now my place in this world is right there in the middle, bridging those two, and that's my role, and trying to play it out.
Yeah, it's an important role, no doubt about it. Well, Rodolfo, before we say goodbye, where can people connect with you in person or online? And is there anything coming up specifically that you'd like people to know about in the near future?
Yeah. Okay. So online, I've got my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Rodolfo.Carrillo. And I don't know if you write that somewhere, I should spell it.
No, we'll include it in the notes.
Yeah, there'll be a link in the show notes. Yep.
All right, it would be there, or my company page, which is consultores.ser, and I'll share that with you later. Or I also have an email, which is rjcarrillo@hotmail.com. And in regards to what's coming up, I will be doing by the end of this year a retreat here in Costa Rica, which is called Master Your Inner World, which is basically where I share this philosophy from where I work from, and which is where I work from not only on a personal level, but also on a systems level. And it's basically taking people through a personal journey and giving them the structure and how to see themselves in a certain way where you can become conscious of what's going on with you and this complex system that goes on, that develops within us, and how do we deal with it. So that's why it's called Master Your Inner World.
And if people are interested in that, if they connect with you on Facebook, I assume they would learn of it there. Yep.
Yeah, and they can write to me, and I'll send them the information.
Great. Very exciting, Rodolfo. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a rich conversation, and we're really grateful for your time, and thanks so much.
It's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you very much for the space and the time, and for connecting with me through Kim and Theo, which are amazing people.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
There are no coincidences. Thank you so much.
Thanks. That's it for this week's Ownstream Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this amazing interview with Rodolfo Carrillo. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including his Facebook page, the books he recommended, and other resources discussed. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Rodolfo Carrillo. That's ownstream.co/RODOLFO CARRILLO.
Also, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual tip or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up.
Finally, please leave us a review on iTunes. We really need your help in expanding our reach, helping us to inspire more people and spread the amazing ideas discussed on this episode with Rodolfo Carrillo and others too. If it feels right to you, simply go to iTunes, search for the Ownstream Podcast, click ratings and reviews, then click that 5th star and leave us a brief comment on how this episode has inspired you. Thank you so much for considering that. We are very grateful. Also, we're on Twitter and Facebook at Ownstream and on Instagram at own_stream. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to the Ownstream Podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.